Hello, I'm Robert. I'm from the Facebook group Doomsday Debunked, where I help people who are scared of many things. And this is to help someone who's got this image from Facebook kind of stuck in their mind, and although they know there's nothing to be afraid of, they're still terrified by this idea. And this can happen to you if you got scared of something. Our minds are not always completely logical. So if it's been something very traumatic, and this is sometimes used with people who are treating people with post-traumatic stress disorder, something very traumatic from the past, and no matter how much logic you put into it, you've got something else to change as well before you can get over it. And this happens sometimes to people who see a really scary video, that even once it's completely debunked, they're still terrified by it. And they feel so helpless and so illogical. How can you be scared of something when you know that it's not actually going to happen? And it's because it works at a different level. And I'm just going to try something that they use. You may well have nightmares of this. So if you want to go to a therapist, then if you have nightmares, then they can help you with what they call nightmare reimagination or something, dream reimagination or something. And so that might be a way to help if it's really bad for you. I'm just trying something out, just for you to try, but in case it helps on a similar kind of level. So first of all, so I'm no therapist. I'm just suggesting that this might be something you might like to give a go at, and then if it's serious, you need to see a therapist about this. But the thing is that we work visually much more directly than we do via words. So I'm first of all going to try playing this video and talking over it without the sound, and explaining as it goes that it's completely harmless, and explaining this image, which I'll keep up. No, that's not the one I want. Go back. How do I go back? This one. Right. So I've set this playing. Go to that image. And as you can see, first of all, this is a simulation, as I say there, of an impact from 4 billion years ago. And the I've actually included the video that it comes from, and just to give an idea of how big it was, it's simulated on modern Earth. It didn't mean that this could happen on the modern Earth, not at all. They're just simulating it. And there are no big asteroids left of this size anywhere near Earth. This is Earth, you're here. And all the big asteroids are way out there. All the big asteroids of this size are way out there, vast, vast distance away. This can never happen, even though it looks so realistic, but that's just because of modern CGI. This can't happen to the modern Earth. It's absolutely impossible. And this title is a fake title. Anyone can take any video and post it to Facebook in this case, or YouTube. They can type anything they like into the title of the video. And so they typed that this is something going to happen on April 13th, 2036. This is not going to happen on any future date. This is totally, absolutely impossible. This just can't happen. Now I'm going to stop. No, I think I'll keep going with the video. So you can still see how it's going. And it looks like a droplet of water, doesn't it? Looks quite a bit like those images. And that's no surprise, because it's a very similar process. This is very like the sort of process you get from a droplet falling into a big pool of water. And so if you think of Earth as being in this, it's just like a droplet. And these are like the little the blobs from the droplet that can go flying off and land in other water. But this time it's lava. And in the very early solar system, then the Earth was repeatedly pummeled by big asteroids, and it was often turned into great lakes of lava, like this. And if you think of this as being something that happened 4 billion years ago, rather than something that happens today, then it's not scary because it's long, long ago, and we wouldn't be around if it weren't for this happening. Now, it's not realistic for this to happen with mountains and snow, because back then, in the very early solar system, it was too hot, and there wasn't any snow, and there weren't any continents yet. The continental drift was just starting. There were just little islands in the middle of a vast, vast ocean, which gradually accumulated more and more light material to form the continents, but the rock was too heavy. And so this is actually not realistic for the time when this really did happen. And there wouldn't be any trees, obviously. This is 4 billion years before more than 4 billion years before any trees evolved. So in that sense, it's totally unrealistic. But it is realistic that way back 4 billion years ago, that the Earth would have been hit by these big things that would have totally evaporated the ocean and would have turned the entire Earth into molten. It became molten. But of course, there were no cities back then. There was no Big Bang. They're just doing this in order to give you an idea of how big those very early oceans were. There was no Athens, there was no columns. All of this was billions of years into the future. This, again, if you go and watch the actual video in context, then they explain it. And they say this is not something that's going to happen today. And if you watch the original video, it's not scary at all, because they explain very clearly that this can't happen today. And so maybe you can watch the original video, but maybe this talk over will help you a bit. And then I'm going to end this video with a slow motion video of a water droplet. And hopefully, maybe if you have dreams about this, then you can remember that this is something that only happened 4 billion years ago in the past. This is not Apophis. There's not any possible, there's no possibility. There are asteroids still as big as that one, and I will stop this now. I don't want to see whatever it suggests next. So I'll stop this now. There are asteroids as big as the ones that did make the Earth molten 4 billion years ago, but they orbit permanently and safely in the asteroid belt. And in the early solar system, then the Earth was very, it hadn't completely formed. This is going back to soon after Earth itself formed, and the Moon formed, and there are lots of big debris floating around in the solar system, and they gradually got mopped up by all the planets, and that's how the planets formed. They're gradually mopping up all the debris, all the smaller bits into bigger and bigger bits, and then smaller, and these protoplanets that size, they smashed together and they eventually formed Mercury, Venus, Mars and Earth. And then eventually that was all over, and the planets completely cleared out. Everything big has been cleared out of the inner solar system, and we can't be hit by anything even remotely as big as that in the future. So to end with something, first of all, I'll talk a little bit about the video. So this is I haven't brought it up now, I seem to have closed the window, so I'll bring it up. So here, this is the actual video. So, and I've got a link to where he's talking about it. So first of all, talk about this image. That's a very famous image of an early protoplanetoid hitting the early solar system by Don Davis, who's a famous artist. And yeah, I can search for that. Don Davis. I'll put it between paintings by Don Davis. So I'll bring that up there, and it's one of his most famous paintings. And it says there, a planetoid ploughs into primordial Earth during some eons of time when conditions were ripe for the development of Earth. It's possible that life of kinds unknown to us appeared repeatedly, only to be destroyed in collisions like this one, which could rework the entire surface. He's talking there about microbial life. I mean, it's not even possible that it could be very early, very primitive multicellular life. That some people think it's almost impossible to know what happened back then, before the evolution of the first multicellular life, because there's almost nothing remains. But there could have been little sort of matty things that floated in the sea that were somewhat multicellular, some out of the way people think that way back then there might even have been very primitive multicellular life of a kind that has been lost long ago. But just planty things, or just not even plants, not new photosynthesis, just sort of matty things that sort of stuck together and floated on the sea, and sort of spongy matty stuff. But anyway, it's possible life, or maybe even exotic kinds of life, slightly multicellular, appeared repeatedly, only to be destroyed in discussions like this, which would rework the entire surface. And then fortunately, the average size of debris declined sharply through geological time. But the supply of wavered rocks a few kilometers across is is by no means exhausted. So the ones with a few kilometres across, they're still possible. This size is absolutely impossible. And you look at that, that's about getting on the side. I mean, that's 1,000 kilometres, this one. This one is, and if you go and look at the video, he has that size of asteroid at the back, in his window behind him. And so it's 1,000 kilometres. And let's look up the diameter of the moon. So I think it's about 2,000 kilometres. 3,000 kilometres. So the moon is 3.5 times the size of this one, and then this one is twice the diameter of this one. And but if you look at the ones that the Earth that could happen on Earth, primitive Earth, yeah, I should have shown that image. Made sure to bring this up just to remind you again. This is not Apophis. It's very ancient past. So if you look at his one, then the largest asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs would be, I think, less than a pixel on this size. You wouldn't see it. It's the size of New York, and New York you wouldn't see at this scale. Tiny, tiny little pixel thing. And then if you look at, and then we know all of those as well, and none even that size can hit us this century, or indeed for thousands of years. So we know even the 10-kilometre ones very well. We probably know all the ones above 3.5 kilometres, and we know nearly all of the ones of 1 kilometre, and the only one of that size that can hit us is in 2880, and it's expected to miss. Extremely unlikely it hits by then. 1 kilometre, a 1 kilometre asteroid is just big enough to throw enough dust into the atmosphere to cool, so it doesn't do much locally. It's just it would definitely 1 kilometre one would probably land in the ocean or a desert. But if it landed on a city, then it would indeed flatten all the houses in a city, and it would blow out all the windows throughout a small country like England or the Netherlands or something. But even a 1 kilometre asteroid is not big enough to do much to the global climate. It certainly wouldn't send rocks around the Earth. It would send dust and ash around the Earth. It would stay in the atmosphere for a few weeks before it rains out, a few weeks or up to a month or two before it all falls out. And so 1 kilometre asteroid, then that's enough to kind of impact on our harvests a bit for 1 year. And we have 40% excess of grains at the end of every year. So even without any preparation, we could survive a 1 kilometre one, and anyone they would know if you see an asteroid approaching, then a week in advance with our modern tracking, we can know where it's going to hit within 100 metres. And we'd know 1 kilometre one, it's very, very unlikely that any of those surprise us, because we know nearly all the 1 kilometre ones, 95% of them. If there are any left, then almost certainly, then it's because they're drifting gradually relative to Earth, and they're behind the Sun, and they're just going to gradually peep out from behind the Sun and slowly drift around and take at least a year and probably a decade or so to get around close to Earth. And then they'd most likely do a flyby, and do several flybys probably before they hit us. So it's extraordinarily unlikely, and especially if it does a flyby, even a 1 kilometre asteroid, then we can deflect it, even with the things we have today, especially if we can deflect it before a flyby. But it has these very sensitive keyholes due to travelling so close to Earth. So the only 1 kilometre one we have is 1950 DA, and expected to miss in 4 centuries from now. And we can certainly deflect that in that very, very remote chance that as we find out more about its orbit, we find it's going to hit. But that's not likely. As we find out more about its orbit, we expect to show it misses. So, really, and it's not surprising. If you think about it, the last 1 kilometre asteroid to hit us was 700,000 years ago. These are extraordinarily rare, even the 1 kilometre asteroid. There have been 7,000 centuries since the last one, and there probably will be thousands of centuries before even the next 1 kilometre asteroid. And of course, it didn't even make Homo erectus extinct. Their tools are mixed in with the what do they call them? The tektites, the little the molten bits of glass that were thrown up by this asteroid, and one of them would have seen a 1 kilometre asteroid. You can imagine ancient Homo erectus. Do I have that easy to hand? Homo erectus. I think I'd have to go to my list, and then I could maybe bring that up. Does it show me the list without signing in? I'm doing this so as to not get notification. Let's get a little bit wrong. No, up to 20 minutes. I mean, if someone is watching this, then I think they can take a 20-minute video because it's helping you with being scared. So I'm going to do this little bit first, and then I will finish with this water droplet. It's quite peaceful, and a peaceful way to end. So, it's taking a while to load. I'll try and think what I'm looking for. I know, I've got it at the end of this. Harmless Splosh. I've got it at the very end of here. I'll bring that up. I think, somewhere. Yes. Did you know that NASA never issued any asteroid warning? Core is being a little bit slow, obviously. Just the website I use to blog. Quite slow. Here we go. So, NASA have never issued any asteroid alert. Most likely is a tiny asteroid splosh harmlessly in the Pacific Ocean. That's just because the Pacific Ocean is the biggest area of the and you get this. Looks a very dramatic splosh because if you look, there's the size of an airplane, and if you had something like a bit bigger, that's 50 meters across or so, and it's splashed in the ocean, then this would go up hundreds of meters. But this is not a tsunami. So it's just a big splosh. A tsunami has a wavelength of typically 100 kilometers or so. It's caused by an earthquake which pushes up a huge slab of rock at the bottom of the ocean, up a meter or so, maybe several meters, and this moves the entire ocean surface up over maybe 100 kilometers, up a meter or so. And this then causes a wave that goes out, and that's your tsunami. And the wave that goes out has a wavelength of maybe 100 kilometers, and that's what makes a tsunami so devastating. Because this wave, though it's not very big to start with, just comes and comes and comes, and it keeps rising and rising and going up into inland. That's why tsunamis are so devastating. But the impact from a small asteroid then creates a very dramatic splosh, and would be worth going enthusiasts would be chartering jets to watch this thing. But if it's in the middle of the Pacific, it's not going to harm anyone, because the splosh has got a very short wavelength, just tens of meters probably. The thing's only 50 meters across. It just splashes up, and then it just splashes out. And in order to go across the ocean like a tsunami, it has to have a wavelength that is 20 times more than the depth of the ocean. And a 50 meter, 100 meter wavelength just doesn't cut it. It can't spread out at all. It'll just quickly splosh away. And that's what the most likely impact from an asteroid is going to be. Even a 1 kilometer asteroid, you'd have to be pretty close to land for it to really be a proper mega tsunami, because it splashes out like that too. It's not really deep enough if it landed in the deep ocean. But if it was like, a few 100 kilometers offshore, a big 1 kilometer one would be a mega tsunami for sure. But so this, I'm just going to show you. There we are. This is the debris from the 1 kilometer impact from 700,000 years ago. And these are the creatures of source. Sorry, not us, Homo erectus, ancient hominids, and they saw the debris, and they would have seen it. You can actually see there. You can see the debris there. These are the tektites. So that's sort of molten rock, glassy rocky stuff that gets thrown up by a big impact. And here's a hand axe thing by Homo erectus. It's in the same strewn field as this. So they must have seen the tektites falling out of the sky, and they may have seen the impact from a distance. Creatures like this, they actually saw it, and then they just said, they probably thought, what on earth's that? Wow. Maybe they thought they were gods playing games, or maybe they didn't have ideas of gods back then. Maybe it's very little difficult to know how much of an idea. Maybe it's a funny splash, and then just funny bright light. Maybe they didn't even have any concepts to try and think there was anything. It's very hard to know how Homo erectus was thinking. They didn't make tools. They may have had language. It's hard to know, because we have non-language speaking, tool-making crows and chimpanzees. So did the creatures who made this, were they able to speak and think like we do? It's a lot of hypotheses. Nobody really knows. Yeah? Or were they just like chimpanzees? And just like going, woohoo, wah, woohoo, bang, 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 woohoo, and then another chimp goes, oh, woohoo, oh, bang, bang, and does the same. And they copy each other. And we don't know if they were like that, or if they were actually saying, ooh, rock, bang, try bang, bang like this. And did they do that, or did they just go woo woo bang bang? And nobody knows. So anyway, those were the people who there were creatures that saw the ancient that saw the last time there was 1 kilometre thing. 7,000 centuries again, likely to be as far in the future, and we're likely to evolve over that time. Probably 7,000 years from now, 700,000 years from now, probably whoever sees the next 1 kilometre thing maybe won't look exactly like us. Evolution hasn't stopped just because we're using computers and so on, unless they actually use gene editing to make sure they don't change. So probably it won't even maybe look quite like humans. Now, I think actually that human beings are actually having an effect. Interesting thing to speculate about. Human beings are actually creating loads of puzzles throughout the world, like blue tits learning to peck off the tops of milk bottles, or crows having to solve these puzzles that people set them in order to test their intelligence, and parrots and dogs becoming more intelligent, because an intelligent sheepdog is much more useful to a farmer if it's very intelligent and can understand the orders that the farmer whistles to it. And what's this going to do? It's going to be going on for a few thousand years. What's it going to do 100,000 years in the future? And there's some quite fun science fiction stories about that. For instance, where dogs gradually become as intelligent as humans. The sheepdogs gradually become as intelligent as the shepherds, 100,000 years from now or something. And then they take part in the same society as everyone else. And then they can look back at our history and say, well, way back then, 100,000 years ago, we were sheepdogs running around chasing sheep. And now we're part of the civilization. And another group of intelligent creatures in the future might say, oh, back then we were pet parrots. We were the grey parrots that were pets of human beings. And others would say, oh, we were crows. We used to hop around and try and find things in the rubbish heaps of human beings. And we gradually became more intelligent over time. And others could say, oh, we were whales, or we were dolphins way back then. And thank goodness they saved our species and didn't hunt us to extinction. And I think that over a period, because so many creatures and elephants and so many and orangutans, you come say, oh, thank goodness they saved the orangutans, because we wouldn't be here if they didn't. I think that actually there's quite a strong possibility, without us doing any uplifting, which is a science fiction term for the idea of gene editing, but even without that, we probably will be a civilization of many different species, all intelligent and working together in the distant future. Anyway, I got a bit distracted, but maybe you enjoy that kind of fun speculation, just for fun. So I've got a thing down here about, where is it? Yes, if you look at just look at the area of the ocean, then that's over the next 10,000 years. Then you expect 71 impacts into the ocean of these little sploshy things. Little splashy things are far, far more likely than 1 kilometre one. I mean, 10,000 years is just a blink in time for 1 kilometre one. We're not going to get one. Extremely unlikely that we get a 1 kilometre one in the next 10,000 years. But we're likely to get lots of splashes of these little ones because they're very, very common. We'll probably get 71, just averaging out. Nobody really knows quite. It's very hard to estimate, but it's somewhere between, some people say 50, 80, 100 years. I'm just assuming 100 years between them, the next 71, because we just haven't had enough way back in history, people just didn't record them. And they just, I think splashing in the ocean, nobody would notice. For every, there may even have been one splashing in the ocean in the early 20th century, nobody would know. We'd have no way of telling. So it's quite hard to know how often these things actually hit, and they try and do it through counting craters on the moon and through counting the ones that fly past. There's still quite a lot of error margin factor too, so probably at least. And so I think they're getting better. I'm not sure what the latest is. But anyway, just assuming it's one every century, then you have 71 following the oceans, and you would have all these ones following the deserts and grassland. Just one in all those 10,000 years would land in an urban or semi-urban area, actually land there and demolish houses. So it's very, very unlikely that even a small one does anything harmful. And if it's going to splosh in the distant ocean, all these simulations are always about an asteroid that's doing a beeline for New York, because they need to test urban preparedness, or some city in the United States, because they are run by FEMA, and they use them to test urban preparedness in the United States. So of course the simulation has to end with an asteroid hitting a city in the United States, but that's extremely unlikely. Probably have to wait thousands of years before that happens. So most likely we get this splosh in the ocean, and then the other various ice sheets are very common, or grassland, vast areas of just like the tundra and so on. Or ice sheets and tundra there, and then just vast areas of grassland in the world. They're big steppes, and the savanna and so on. Then you have another big area, the deserts, which would have the fall. And forests, of course, a large area, tropical rainforests and the big forests of the world. It's most likely in the ocean, and so it would look like a splosh. And if you look at that splosh, so that's a good way to end with a splosh. So I said the very early one ended with a splosh, and then very likely, that's most likely for the future as well, there's a big splosh in the ocean like that. It's completely harmless unless you are within a few hundred meters of it or so. Then you wouldn't want a little boat in a little dinghy or even a big tanker there with this thing sploshing onto you. So shipping would stay out of the area. People would fly past in the jets and look at it and photograph it from the air. And I think quite possibly if they notice something that's 15 meters in diameter that is heading to splosh in the ocean, there's no point in deflecting it. You can make it worse by deflecting it. And it'd be great fun to watch. Because if you deflect it, you don't deflect it far enough, it might hit something important. So we may actually see this in the future. We are never going to, let's bring up that thing once more. Oh sorry, I didn't mean to do that there. We're never going to see that, the splosh in the, that big, but we may well see that. And then this is the point to bring up a nice slow motion video, and that is very much like this slow motion video of a droplet. And so that's a nice peaceful thing to end with. And lots of other peaceful videos of water droplets in slow motion. So you might like try, look, there you are. Or you can actually do the preview now, can't you? Look about that. So there we are. You can preview these. Let's play a few of them. Oh, you can probably get ads. There we are. Slow droplet. And so if you had a small asteroid splosh in the ocean, you get that, including that little thing pop up and fall down again. You'd see something like that. That's the first thing, of course, is it's an asteroid, not a droplet. And then, as the asteroid hits in the middle of the Pacific, then it would create this little cavity here, and it would actually evaporate quite a lot of it, unlike this droplet that's just falling. The rock would create a cavity and evaporate large areas. Then it would go up like that, and you get the you get a little bit of a splosh up like that. And then you get, see if I can get the splosh. You do get, there you are. It's not really doing that splosh. But you get the big splosh coming up. I think that must depend on how you do how the droplet falls in. I see if there's one with the kind of crown. There's more of a crown effect. And there we are. That's quite a crown effect. Let's do that one. And hope it doesn't have any ads. There we are. Look. Yeah, there we are. Great, brilliant. That is what would happen. Much better. Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily get the original droplet, but you might. Bouncing back. Here we are. You see, that's what an asteroid splosh will look like. Imagine a little jet that big, a little jet like that, could fly past and watch the water splosh up. So the other one I showed, the dip in, was good for the dip in the ocean, but this is good for the splosh. Yeah, do you see the dip? Yeah, you see the dip there, but it's quite hard to see. Just back there, you see the dip. Try the dip again. You just see that there's a dip happening there. It's very hard to see from this angle. And then you see the big splash going up. And so you see that. And then it falls down, it makes a little ripple. And then you get that thing in the middle comes up. And this ripple, notice that as it goes out, it's multiple ripples. You would get that in the asteroid splash. And you get these waves, they're very, very quickly dissipating. You're not like a tsunami. Very, very quickly dissipating away as it goes away. And you will see, there's almost nothing left of the ripples going out now. The reason is because the reason is because of that big dip in the middle, which sort of pulls the water back. So you get quite big waves to start with, like that, great big wave like that. But as it goes on, then when they do the simulations, they get the dip in the middle pulls the water back, and so you get very little actually spreads out in the waves. I've read the scientific papers on how simulating asteroid collisions, and it's like that. You get a very temporary, short-term big splosh in there, and then you get the ripples going out, and they very quickly fade away. And so, unless it was just within hundreds of meters of the shore, you can't get anything even like a storm surge. And because it's a very narrow wavelength, then even a big impact, say into the Sea of Japan, which is very shallow, and it could be just shallow enough so that it spreads a bit, would come up onto the shore, but it's only like a storm surge. It hasn't got the staying power of a tsunami. It would just surge up a little bit and then it's gone, because there's nothing much behind it, because it's just very short wavelength. So even a big asteroid of 50, 100 meters even, landing in the Sea of Japan, a shallow sea, close to the shore, would still not cause anything like even a normal tsunami, unless you're very, very close. If it landed just right close to your house, as it were, then you get to have a huge big splosh going up 100 meters or more and land on your house. And of course that would be devastating, but that's extraordinarily unlikely. And anyway, remember that so long as it's any asteroid that they're tracking, it's not going to harm you, because for one thing they can deflect. So Apophis, which is the one that they're worried about, it's so a bit of bonus. So I'll just talk a little bit about Apophis. You can stop at this point. Let's talk a little bit about Apophis, since that's what it's about. So I'm just going to talk briefly about Apophis for anyone who hasn't seen my longer video. So here's Apophis, and they know it very well indeed. They've got observation going back 2003, and this is in 2020. They've disproved any possibility of it hitting in 2036. They know it's going to go past that distance exactly. That's how exactly they know its orbit. And more exactly, it's like that, just outside geostationary orbit, which is what this is. All the satellites of geostationary orbit, which go around the Earth once a day and so are constantly above the surface of Earth. It's going to skim just past those, so it's not going to hit those satellites. And they know exactly where it's going to fly past. That's in 2029. Very, very exactly. Somewhere around here, there's this gravitational keyhole. That just means that in order for it to hit in 2036, it had to go through a particular point, a particular distance away from Earth, somewhere at this closest point here. The gravitational keyhole is defined on the right hand, it's defined on it's perpendicular to the, to the closest point, like that. That perpendicular is the closest point on the hyperbole. It's approximately the hyperbole as seen from Earth, and you go like that. then there will be a gravitational keyhole somewhere there. I don't know whether it's inside or outside. And if you had to go through that in order to hit in 2036, as they refined the calculations, they found it doesn't go through that point, so it can't hit in 2036. There will still be a gravitational keyhole for, say, 2060, but they just don't know its orbit well enough to. So somewhere there is a gravitational keyhole that's within the uncertainty for 2060. So as it flies past in 2021, if they can manage to work out to measure how far away it is very accurately, then they should be able to prove that it can't hit in 2060. But they can actually, they're refining it, so they'll be refining it during its current apparition. Apparition is when it's close enough to be seen easily. And it is currently 2020 to 2021, they're doing loads and loads of observations of Apophis. And by the end of 2021, they will look back on all those observations and they will refine its orbit. And that may well prove that it will miss in 2060. And if not, then they have the 2029 flyby. And during the 2029 flyby, it's going to come extremely close to Earth. And so close, as you say, this would be very, very accurate determination. There are some ideas of landing a spacecraft on it, because it'd be very interesting to see. It'd be really fun. It'll be as faint, as bright as one of the faintest stars in the Seven Sisters, so you would actually see it with naked eye in a very dark sky. You'd see a very, very faint star moving across the sky. With binoculars, I figured out, if you looked at it through binoculars, you'd actually see it moving. A very, very faint star in 2029. And it's so close that it's within the tidal disruptive limit for Apophis. It does nothing to Earth, it hasn't got anything like enough gravity, but Earth has enough gravity to move little stones around on the surface of Apophis as it goes flying past. And so there's an idea that we could land a little spacecraft on Apophis to watch the stones move around and just notice what happens to its surface as it goes past Earth because of the tidal effect of Earth's gravity. Because the gravity on Apophis is it's got almost no gravity at all. It's so small, 350 meters across. And so just a tiny disturbance from Earth's tidal forces on it will move little bits of material around. And it'd be fascinating to land a spacecraft on it and just watch the surface gradually change shape slightly as it goes past Earth. So I do hope they do that mission. And if they land a mission on Apophis, there's still time to do it. And it could just be a very small thing that it could be to land on Apophis, then they'd be able to watch little pebbles moving around. And so as it goes past Earth. And that would help us have a better understanding of what asteroids are like. But Apophis, it's again. So if you want an image for Apophis, then think of it when it goes past in 2029. We know very, very well how far away. This is the closest it's going to come. It's only 35 meters across. It is not going to look like that. Apophis will not look like that. You won't see a big thing in space. That would look at that distance. That would look bigger than the moon to someone on the surface. But what you will actually see is, so if you go back to there, what you will actually see is a very, very faint star, and you'd have to be in a dark place. Dark enough to see all the even small. This is the, not sure which it is. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You could see if you could see the faintest stars, but if you can see all the stars of the Seven Sisters, and that's not one of the faintest. If you could see all 7 or 6 or 5, then you would be able to see this star. But if you look from a city, then often you can't even see the faintest stars of the Seven Sisters. The Pleiades, if you've never seen it, you should look it up and take a look at it with binoculars. It's a rather fine thing. It's one of the nicest things in the sky to look at through binoculars. So if you've got a pair of binoculars, then especially in winter in the northern hemisphere, you can find the Pleiades very easily. It's not far from Orion. And have a look at it. Look at a star chart, have a look at it, look at it with binoculars, look at the faintest star there, and that is what Apophis will be like as it flies past in 2029. And anyone if we get a good clear night, then I'll certainly be out with my binoculars looking at Apophis as it goes flying past in 2029. It'd be quite a sight to see it. It won't look like anything much, just a very, very faint star, but you could see it with binoculars, and you see it just moving slowly, and you just knowing that it's not a satellite. It will move a bit slower than a satellite, and just very, very slowly across the sky. But through binoculars, you see it moving, I think. Just moving slowly, and you'll be able to follow it going across the sky. And know that is Apophis, and I do hope that someone somewhere lands a spacecraft on it, and so we can actually, and it would be great public relations exercise to have a spacecraft with an Earth-facing camera, as well as looking at the Apophis surface, and bonus points if you can actually have a bit of the Earth Apophis surface on it. Apophis is quite interesting, and because looking towards Earth, you see Apophis is actually, it's rotating, but not only is it rotating, it's tumbling. It doesn't rotate with a steady spin rate. It's rotating not about its shortest axis, but a longer axis. And asteroids like that, they don't just turn constantly. They tumble. They turn. They go in the back. They sort of a bit like that, and then they go like that, and they go like that, and they go like that. And they're constantly changing the axis that they're tumbling about. So Apophis is a tumbling asteroid, and because of its irregular shape, and it does still have the Yarkovsky effect, but it has a Yarkovsky effect for a tumbling asteroid. They also have this Yarkovsky effect, which causes it to move very, very slightly. But you don't need to worry about the Yarkovsky effect because it's exceedingly minute. For Apophis, it's barely measurable. They've just about figured out that they think they've measured it now, and they've taken it into account. But I mean, especially with a tumbling asteroid, it does still have a Yarkovsky effect, but it sort of counteracts itself a little bit as well. And anyway, so there are ways of working out the Yarkovsky effect for tumbling asteroid. They've worked out what it is. They've fed that into the thing. It does have consistently one way, but sort of tumbling around that way. It doesn't sort of reverse direction. It's consistently more or less the same direction, but I think it varies by 30 degrees or something in the direction the axis goes or something, in the way it tumbles. And so anyway, that'd be another thing. It'd be quite fascinating to have something on the surface, to see the little rocks moving around because of its tidal effect, and also observe the tumbling close up, and to look at Earth, and you'll be able to see Earth sort of coming across the sky from time to time as it tumbles. So I hope they can do a public relations thing and have a landing with lots of cameras. Some cameras look at the surface, and some looking up a bit and having enough from the sky, and maybe a broad panoramic vision, so that you can look from Earth and see a large area of the sky, large enough so you see Earth come through the field of view as it tumbles, and Earth rising at different points on its surface because it's tumbled around to a different position. I mean, Apophis is quite fascinating and rather fun asteroid, and I hope it's around for many years, many centuries to come, so that our future descendants can have fun and learning more about Apophis. It's exceedingly unlikely to hit. Asteroids that big only hit every few thousand years or something, and is it tens of thousands? I can't remember. And and maybe in the future, it could be quite a useful asteroid. Maybe that we could use it. We could kind of mine it, and use the rocks of Apophis to make a space station. It's not so much for building it, but if you are in space and you have like a big circular. So we may well in the future have these huge things, maybe kilometers across even, that are very slowly turning for artificial gravity for their residence. The kind of wheel space stations that you have, like what's it, Deep Space Nine or something. I think they have one. I'm not sure, but those big wheelie stations, they're actually feasible to build. Back in the 1970s, and a team in Stanford actually worked out how we could practically make one, and we could have had a couple of those by now if we'd followed their proposal. And their idea was they would pay for themselves by having 10,000 people in space who would maintain solar satellites, getting solar energy, which back then wouldn't have been using solar panels. They'd have been solar thermal satellites, and back then they couldn't do the sort of things we could do now, so they thought they'd have to have thousands of people in space maintaining these solar satellites. And if they'd done that back in the 1970s, then most of our electricity would be coming from these ancient solar satellites. Because only recently that we've advanced on solar thermal. Nowadays, solar photovoltaic is more affordable than the solar thermal that we now have, that we just already have in deserts. But we could have had thousands of satellites in space with just great big mirrors focusing sunlight onto and heating up molten salt, and then converting that into microwaves and or whatever it had. I can't remember how they're going to beam it back to Earth, and beaming the electricity back to Earth. And then they reckon that electricity would have been very cheap. And I sometimes wonder, suppose someone had built the Stanford Torus back then. Suppose it was like another Apollo moonshot kind of a project. It could have been built. It was feasible. We had the economy to do that. If instead of say, big defence projects, we had a big project to build the Stanford Torus, then, according to their calculations, we could have had much of the world electricity by now coming from these solar condenser type satellites in space. So you can write a fun alternative history where the Stanford Torus was actually built, and then another, and they started building these solar, and we would then have had these vast arrays, thousands of solar condensing sunlight and satellites, and we maybe would never have had climate change like we have now, because we would just have had all our electricity coming from these, from renewables, just naturally, before people even, 1970s, that was before they even realised that the Milankovitch cycles, that they worked. I remember back then they didn't know about global warming back then. I was a school child in the 1960s, and back then people were still thinking that climate change was a kind of random walk of going from one place to another, that just gradually the climate was changed slowly a little bit one way or another, and some little thing could push it one way rather than another, and it might just gradually, just through chance, go towards the next ice age. And then they were arguing that it's been about 10,000 years since the last ice age, so we should probably have the next one, because that's usually how long it is between ice ages. Climate science was very primitive in the 1960s, just like our computers. It's only in the 1970s that the idea of the Milankovitch cycles and the modern ideas for climate science came along, and since then it's been astonishingly accurate. But when they did the Stanford Torus project, I don't think people knew that global warming was a thing, but they just saw this would be a great way of paying for a big spinning space satellite. We could pay for it by making electricity in space. And if they'd gone ahead with that, I sometimes wonder, would this whole global warming thing have happened? Maybe we would just have had everything would have been solar powered from space. Anyway, we can still do this in the future. Japan is working on this, but they wouldn't use big solar condensers. They would probably use the same idea. It's economic because the mirrors would not be made, not be big, thick, heavy things. They would be very thin film mirrors, just microns thick. So very, very light material that can be, like 100 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 1 kilometer in diameter, then bigger, then maybe 10 kilometers in diameter, just big thin film mirrors, just sort of floating in space at, say, geostationary orbit or something, and collecting the sunlight and condensing it onto solar panels. Nowadays would probably be sort of solar photovoltaic panels, or onto or heating things up and then being down to Earth. So that can be economic, because the thin films, you can't do that on Earth. You can't collect. Those thin films just blow apart in the faintest breeze, but up in space. So that's why it's economic to send this into space, and this is why Japan is actually doing quite a lot of research, multi-million-dollar project in Japan, because Japan imports a lot of fuel, and they don't have much by way of natural resources, and not that strong in renewables either, and so they have the idea of doing having these solar satellites. So we might get them. We might still get them this day, but they wouldn't have people in orbit to service them. All the services would be done from the ground with remotely telepresence and so on, which wasn't even a thing back then. and they do probably use solar photovoltaic and all sorts of things. Anyway, I'm sorry, I got carried away, but I think maybe it's just a little fun bonus feature, as it were. You only need to watch the first 20 minutes to get the main point of this video. I think I should stop now. If any of you are scared about these things, just bring up our Facebook group on Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked. So this is where to go if you want to, if you're scared of these things and you want help, or if you want to help people who are scared of things like this. And do please read the rules at the head of the group, the announcement which is pinned if you join the group. And I say no jokes and no future date, just read these things as a public group. We have some private groups as well. Anyway, so maybe see some of you on Facebook if you're not there already, on the Doomsday Debunked. And do subscribe to this channel, and hope this helped some of you who got scared of this absolutely ridiculous, totally silly story. This is not Apophis. It can't happen. It's the most likely is a splosh in the ocean. Yeah, let's just quickly go through them all. Splosh in the ocean. All the big asteroids are here. This is not Apophis. When it flies past in 2029, it will just be a faint star flying past, and nothing to worry about at all.